In this video, I want to take a look at another game I played against a master. This was a simultaneous exhibition, and well, strangely enough, I had the white pieces. The time control was 60 minutes with a 60-second increment, which is very unusual. And well, my opponent was, I believe, a candidate master. So the game started with e4 knight c6, which is the Nimzovich defense. And well, I wasn't very surprised by this move because I had looked at some of the games that my opponent had played in the database. And well, I have played this position against a computer quite a few times. Now the engine is probably rated around 2300, but I mean, even though you feel like you have a really good position, things can go bad very quickly for white if you play pawn to d4. So I knew that my opponent was obviously going to be very familiar with these types of positions. So for that reason, I decided to not go into that line and just played bishop c4. And we eventually transposed into a different opening. So here my opponent decided to play e5. And now it's like a king's pawn opening. And well, now after knight f3, we could transpose into an Italian with after bishop c5. But my opponent decided to play knight f6, the two knights defense. And well, I guess this is still technically an Italian or Jacopiano, but here I decided to play knight c3, which I wouldn't have done so if I knew what my opponent's reply was going to be. Then again, playing knight g5 just gets things to be extremely complicated, which, depending on how black responds, it can go into either a fried liver attack or a Traxler counter gambit, which I wasn't ready to go into because of all the complications and because I'm not very familiar with all the nuances and the theory behind either one of those openings. So after knight c3, my opponent takes on e4, and you could take on e4. I mean, that's the best move. I decided to play knight d5, but there's also a game between Wesley So and Shakhriyar Mamyudarov where they played bishop takes f7 check. Now, this was probably a rapid game, so in this position, well, knight d5 is not a very good move, but I do occasionally play the Belgrade gambit, so I thought, well, why not? And well, I guess you could also play castles in this position, but I don't think white has objectively sufficient compensation, although it is interesting and it has been played by pretty strong players. So after knight d5, the knight goes back to d6, and I just don't like the knight there. I think going back to f6 would have been better because the bishop still cannot go to g5 to pin the knight, and the knight here is just blocking the pawn, making development take longer than it should. So after bishop b3, bishop e7. Here actually my opponent missed the move e4, which is very strong because, I mean, where does the knight go? all of the squares are covered, which means you have to go back to G1 unless you want to lose the knight. And after something like A5, well, look the evaluation. Black is better because, well, probably because of the pawn, the space, and the fact that you wasted two moves and the knight is still on its original square. This knight is a lot worse than this knight. There's no question about that. So after bishop e7, I played c3 because I did not want to give up the light square bishop. I thought that, well, if it's not useful along this diagonal, it can be very useful along this diagonal, especially after black castles kingside, which he did. And after I castled, my opponent played knight f5, which the knight on f5 is not very good. The knight on f6 would have been better. The knight on f4 would be very good for black. Now, but the knight on f5 is only good if you have the white pieces. So here I played bishop c2 because, well, not only am I attacking the knight, now I think that the bishop is better placed on this diagonal. And, well, d6 just makes a lot of sense. You're defending the knight. You are defending the pawn again. And in this position, I played a move which is not very good, but it just psychologically, sometimes you play moves that you wouldn't play against players around your level, but because you're playing a master, it just kind of messes with your head a little bit, and you end up playing moves like b4, which the idea is I may want to go b5 at some point, and, well, the knight is either going to have to go back to b8 or is going to have to go to a5, which is not a very good square. But really I should be playing d4, but opening up at the center against the master, well, it's not. I wanted to make the game last a little bit longer and not lose in like 15 moves. So, because we're not even on move 10, I was about to make my 10th move. I played b4, although maybe playing rook e1, preparing d4 would have been better. I mean, it's certainly a move I would have considered. But I played b4, and, well, my opponent played bishop e6. And, well, I don't really have any good retreating squares. I could go to e3, but then we can trade, and I just don't think that's the way to play this position. So I took the bishop, and here my opponent made what I believe is mistake is too strong a word, but it's an inaccuracy, which eventually leads to the loss of the game. He took with a queen, which seems very natural. You are connecting the rooks, and you're continuing to develop your pieces. But knight c7 is probably better considering what happened in the game. Now, I'm not gonna judge that move too harshly because I have played people who are several hundred points lower rated than me, and if I just played them one-on-one, I can just crush them. But when I played two of them at the same time, it's actually a lot more difficult than it looks. So after queen takes, I played rook e1, which I was gonna do anyway, but now I think it's even better because, well, potentially there is an attack on the queen if this bishop moves and we get rid of this pawn. And here my opponent played rook a d8, which when he played it, I was kind of worried because I figured that maybe he did calculate a lot more than I did. And well, right now there is no way for my queen to really move out of the file unless, well, that's a terrible error. And I can't even get rid of it. Okay. Unless I want to go to e2. But I decided to play d4 after thinking for a long time. And well, here my opponent just blundered with e takes d4. Here you have to either play knight b8 or bishop c8. Because after this, well, you just win the knight for free because of the pin on the bishop, which I did. So here my opponent played queen f6, and I was already pretty confident that I was going to win this game unless I did just something absolutely terrible. The computer actually recommends 95, and well, by no means is this move gonna save black, but it's actually pretty interesting. After bishop takes, knight takes with check, queen takes, and pawn takes. The queen's being attacked, so let's say queen g3. You do have ideas of maybe pushing e5. Now I know it doesn't work technically because bishop g5, so queen g3 is actually a very good move. But if you play something maybe not that accurate, maybe queen h3, now you do have ideas of maybe e5, and you can make the argument that this passed pawn might give white trouble. Although, look, I mean, again, it's more of a hypothetical scenario because, well, you can just take it. And again, the pin you can't recapture. So even if you give black all that he wants, so let's say, let's try and make just a bad move for white. So after this, maybe something like c5, and let's say, I don't know, a3. Well, now you can start to see that maybe black does have a protected pass pawn. So let's say here and something like this. And takes, and takes. And you have this nice diamond shaped structure. So takes and takes. And again, this should be winning for white, but it just, I wouldn't want to play this position against the computer. I mean, you're just going to push the pawns. And, you know, if a pawn gets to the d2 square, you might as well just resign. So after queen f6, well, I just traded because I'm up a piece. And bishop g5 just wins an exchange. So this is just completely winning. there's really not much of a point to analyze from this point. And now the knight comes back, so I just play d5. And you have to take the pawn, otherwise white is gonna take this guy after the knight moves. And you're gonna have a very strong passed e-pawn. So after queen check, well, king h8, and I just have to make sure there is no counterplay, which there isn't because the knight is being protected by the queen. So I have time to play a3, and there is no rook takes because of the pin. Now if the queen was somewhere else, then okay. But in this position, my opponent didn't even resign. I think he just let his time run down, which he had a lot of. So yeah, I think this game was much smoother than the previous game I played against a master. So not that I've always won all the games that I played against masters. I actually have one where I played against an international master and I lost. So I will show that game because it's actually pretty instructive. So I hope that you liked the video, and if you did, hit the like button and share and subscribe. And thank you for watching.